For this issue, there's a long and a short, applicable to games and martial arts sport. A dagger versus spear is going to look weird, and reach advantage should certainly be feared. So let's look at range beyond the space of 5 feet to make gameplay and sparring much more complete. Hey friends, Lauren back with you, and a different camera angle today because I want you to see this green stripe on the bottom of the video. That's right, there's this little green line. That is my 5 foot mark. So from the wall to the green line, that's 5 feet. And why is that important? Well, the topic of today's video is about reach, range, distance, covering ground between ourselves, where we're centered, and our opponents. And this applies very well to video games, as well as it does to sparring in martial arts. You need to be able to judge the distance, and if you can get an advantage when you have a long weapon like a spear versus, I don't know, a dagger, obviously the spear has a big advantage because you don't need to get close. With the dagger, I actually need to step into the next 5 foot square to attack the person and reach. Okay? With a spear, I actually reach across that 5 feet and into the next 5 feet. If your spear is about 7, 8, 9 feet, maybe you have a pike, something, these are long weapons. They're not so easy to carry around, but they're easier to make. A dagger and a spear, probably about the same amount of work in order to make them. This is, of course, a fancier rondel dagger. Take a bit more work to make those. But the point being, when you have weapons that are longer, they do give you an advantage against someone who has a shorter weapon. Now, yes, there are defenses using a dagger against spear, and you can use the dagger, defend yourself, and counterattack the opponent. But that's not the subject of this video. That's good for a technique video some other time. Preferably if I get help to do it, because someone's got to thrust, I've got to set aside, I've got to do controlling, grab, I've got to do motions to advance in, attack. There's manuals, there's stuff about that. We learn that. But for today, I just want to talk about if you have something in your game, like a spear, it really should have a good position. And if you're running a game, let's say you're the game master, and you really want to thwart someone, you have a character, oh yeah, I use 2 short swords, and I'm unstoppable, and I slice and dice and cut everything. Well, if I have this spear, and there's a 5 foot square between us, and I want to move to the next 5 foot square. Well, with a spear, I can do that. Now, I'm going to take a step, of course, right to the edge of my zone, and if I thrust the spear, you'll notice it has gone past the camera, and I still have a bit of room. I've hit the wall on the other side, which is about 7 feet away, and I'm into that zone. So, even from the back of my zone, there we go. I've got it right there. So the camera is about 6.5 feet from the green line, going vertically, so I can just reach it. If you have shorter weapons and you're trying to attack me, I've got an advantage to suddenly thrust out, recover, and keep you at a distance. How does that apply to sparring martial arts? Well, if it's mixed weapons, use the advantage. You want to make sure that you keep your opponent at that distance. Circle, move. And of course, in fighting, you're always taking steps forward, backwards. Your 5 foot area, you're not static in the center. I'm not fighting like this. No, I'm using my whole body, recovering, because that's what generates the power. And the spear can be extremely effective. It's a little long. If you get your whole body into that and you're using it with 2 hands, you can imagine that big thrusting, stabbing motions, piercing through gaps in armor, this nice little point. Yeah. So it's a good way to create a dynamic, whether it's the narrative of your game or you're fighting someone using a smaller weapon. Use the reach to your advantage. Now, if you were sparring in real life in any kind of weapon, or even unarmed, a good thing to do might be take a tape measure to wherever you train. Measure out distances. to try and get a feel for how far away certain things are. So when someone is at a certain point, you know that, hey, I have a sword that's X meters or centimeters or inches in length, and it seems like that person is out of range. I'm going to adjust myself, then attack, rather than just attack and miss. Because even if, trying to do that with as little noise as possible, even if we had our great sword, so here's the montante, the nice flamberge, this, if I'm in my zone and I just step forward and attack, I ain't quite reach. So even though it's big, it's not quite big enough. So it's going to give me an advantage over a sword that's shorter, like a long sword. There we go. So there's a reach advantage. But then again, it's also heavier, and it takes some more effort to swing, more body mechanics. Definitely its own set of training rules as opposed to a long sword when you're using something like the greatsword. Okay? Plus, if someone has something like this side sword, it's still pretty long for the blade, and I can still get pretty good reach with one hand because the way I can change my body for that thrust allows me to extend the reach that I might not be able to do so well with my montante here. So these are things to consider. And if we're building this into games, which my last few videos have been about, then we are thinking about this dynamic of, if I have a longer weapon and I know how to use it, do I get an advantage over someone with a shorter weapon? The short answer is, yeah, should be that way. Whether it's a game where you have advantage rolling 2 dice and taking the highest, or whether you get to add an extra die, or whether you get a plus to the roll. Maybe we're looking at a d6 system or something like that. Oh, wow, you have a sickle and I have a greatsword. Who's going to win the fight? It doesn't mean that the person with the sickle is going to automatically lose. If you know what you're doing and you're trained how to fight with a sickle, and you've got a few ways to use it to hook and grab, counter the sword, and you're fast enough to step in, sure, maybe you'll get a strike on the opponent. But overall, got to think that the greatsword is going to have some advantages, or even a longsword is going to have some advantages. So these are things you can factor into your game. When we're talking about reach, meaning how long is the weapon and can I get to an opponent before the opponent's weapon can get to me, or we're talking about range, I'm in my 5-foot square, and if I were using a spear, I can actually reach past the adjacent one and into the next one. Well, then I have the advantage. I can attack you, and you can't attack me unless you move, and if you're moving, then I see you moving towards me, and I can counter that as well. So there are all these little things. Again, we're talking about flavoring up our narrative, and maybe even looking at our game mechanics a little bit. And if we're sparring against actual people, we want to make sure that we are using the reach of our weapon to our advantage to keep the opponent at bay, but not going in to the point where it could be knocked aside and that person can then move too close. Because that's the other thing. If I have my montante here, my big greatsword, and I'm attacking, and the opponent manages to get inside, all the energy is up here. That's where I want to hit. I don't want to hit here. Yeah, these lugs, maybe I can drive in, but if that person is closer, and now they are where the momentum isn't, because we want to hit up here, not down here. That's physics. The energy transfer is maximized up here. Doesn't really bounce very well, but from here on up, that's where we want to hit. That's where it's going to hurt the most on the opponent. The opponent gets inside of that, then the reach of our weapon is actually a detriment. So that's something else that we can factor in. If you're writing a story in particular, maybe that's how the hero does it. The hero manages to step back, avoids the swing, and rushes in. Now this weapon is ineffective because it's too long compared to where the person is. But in European martial arts anyway, that's usually where we go to grappling. That's right, you're going to grapple, you're going to wrestle, you're going to throw, you're going to punch, kick, do all the things at close range. Because if the reach of your weapon has been taken out of play, you have to fall back to other techniques. But we could get into a whole other series of how you can factor that into your games, or why you should practice in your sparring those little attempts to grapple with other people. We could go on for hours talking about all this stuff, but I just wanted to give you this overview of reach being the length of the weapon, range being how you can use the weapon and how far you can get with it, as far as what's short range right next to you versus near, or just a little further away, to thinking about when a length of a weapon is too much for the situation and when it gets you into trouble. And that means tight spaces as well. We often forget about that. If we were in a tight space, that dagger is going to be a lot better than the montante is going to be. This needs space to swing. This needs space to move. The dagger doesn't. So suddenly the dagger has the advantage. So factor these in, especially, what's the situation? Well, we can use the rules to say, oh, you're in a low ceiling. Like, I wouldn't want to swing the montante around too much in here, so I'm going to hit the ceiling quite quickly. So this line gives me 5 feet. I know that I have to control my swings. Maybe they're not as powerful, but it's a little bit of a tight space. I might not want to use that. I might want something like a single-handed sword. I might want the arming sword on the wall. It might be much better to use inside a small room. Then it might have the advantage over the dagger. But in a small room, the dagger will probably have the advantage over the montante. So it gets a little complex, but these are things that I think about and I wanted to share. So if you have any thoughts on videos you would like to see me look at, think topics you'd like me to tackle, comment. That's always the most important thing. Your comments will help shape the path of the channel. So hopefully the TTRPG videos, these role-playing game content stuff, people are enjoying those. That's my little aside. And when we get back into 2022, there'll be some more Arms and Armor stuff coming out. But for now, do remember, like, subscribe, comment, most importantly, and do take care. Stay safe, keep on swinging, and know your distance so that you can get into and out of trouble as quickly as possible.